Well, thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to come talk. And honestly, I keep saying I'm super jealous that you guys have this whole program, this building, this opportunity to do this. I mentioned that President Harker has come to Sev-One many times over, and he's always asked us every time, what's one thing that you would change if you could change something, or what's some way that you would want us to engage more in our students? And I told him the first and foremost is the curriculum is getting dated, right? When I graduated from college in 2007, they were still teaching web programming as like a side thing. It wasn't really a whole class. It wasn't really a whole program that you could take. And entrepreneurship was an afterthought. It wasn't even something that was really committed to by the university. So the fact that this building exists, let alone the program exists, is pretty baller. So take full advantage of this. This is really a unique opportunity. And it's not something that a lot of colleges are doing even yet, even on the West Coast, which is where I'm living today. So, as Ben mentioned, my name's Steve Mahoney. I actually work for a company that's now almost about 400 employees. It's called Sev-One. We founded and started right down the street behind the comic book store, if you're familiar with Blue Hen Comics. 9.5 years ago now, in June, myself and another UD student were approached by a guy named Ves Bakalov, and he asked us if we would be interns for this company that he was starting. And long story short, we ended up in a garage, and the interns were really the only 2 employees. So I'm employee number 2, and Doug is employee number 3. If he was here, he'd probably say the numbers the other way around. But we basically started out coding in a garage, like the classic startup story, and 10 years later, here we are, 400 employees. As Ben mentioned, we have offices now in Philadelphia and in Boston. I moved to California because frankly, the weather's better, and I play Ultimate Frisbee a lot, so I like to get out for that. But the company's still there, it's still huge, and the environment is pretty awesome. And we have a really great relationship with UD. We love getting new interns, new students to come in and be a real intern doing real things and having a job opportunity in the future as opposed to being a gopher, coffee grabber, or whatever the case may be. But what I wanted to talk to you guys about today is something a little different than I think you get when you talk to people about entrepreneurship or about starting a business or about companies in general. You get the financials, you get the how do I raise money or how do I build product or how do I negotiate a contract. But there's something that's near and dear to my heart, and that's the people part of startups. It's the thing that makes your company go. It's the reason why we have the relationship with UD. So, when I talk about the people part of startups, there are 3 things that I want to focus on in specific. The culture of the startup itself, the founding team, the guys and the gals who actually get together and build the initial team, and then the individuals, each one of you, whether you're a founder or whether you're an engineer who just starts or whether you're finance or whatever the case may be. And so we're going to start broad, we're going to get really specific. It's going to be really quick because we don't have a lot of time. So when I talk about culture, when you hear about culture in a company, the first thing people usually think of is, I get free food, free booze, and puppies are all around. And it's really awesome. You see it all the time in cool startups and even some cool bigger companies like Google and Twitter and Facebook. But the reality is this isn't culture. This is a bunch of perks. This is a bunch of benefits that you have. In reality, culture is the vision and the values of the company. And those benefits that you have, those puppies that are running around and the free booze that you get, might come from a value that the company has, the value that the company holds, and they realize the way to enact that is by giving you free food, free booze. It doesn't have to be a positive value either. They might value the happiness of their employees. They think happiness is the most important thing to them. That's part of their core beliefs. So they might think, let's make sure all of their needs are met, right? So they want to provide food, they want to provide booze, and puppies. Everybody needs puppies. But they might also value money. They might also value profits. And they realize the only way to eke out the most amount of efficiency from their developers is if they give them enough things, enough needs, think of the hierarchy of needs, that they'll stick around and they'll work 10 hours or 12 hours, right? So it doesn't have to be a positive reason that you're getting your free booze and free puppies and free drunk puppies. But it's there. And the other component of the culture is the vision. And that's what your company is going to look like in the future. What do you imagine the world with product X in it? Or people X in it? What's your world with it in there? And the reason those things are important is because you live and breathe that into every one of the individuals that you work with. How do you know that the next guy you're going to hire, the very first engineer that you're going to get, the very first sales guy, how do you know that they're going to think and breathe the same mantra that you do every single day? You go into an interview, and if you don't ask the question of, what are the things that you value? Here's my vision of the future. What's your vision of the future? If you don't know those things about that person, it's very likely that they're going to make a decision, maybe 6 months, maybe 5 years from now, that you're going to scratch your head about and say, that's really not something I would have done, or that doesn't align with what I would have done for this company. And it's really important to understand that. And so it comes down to those core beliefs. It comes down to that sharing and living and breathing that in every single employee, from the first interview you do to the last interview you do right before you exit because you just had a sweet IPO or whatever the case may be. Speaking of which, it's the founding team that creates the culture, the first culture. They're the ones that set it up. So from my experience, when we were in the garage, it was 3 engineers. Ves, who was a UD grad, myself, and Doug. We were all 3 developers. And our culture was open conversation and fast development and innovation as fast as possible. Our values were the technology and loving innovation. Our values were openness and communication. We would have arguments like you would not believe. We would decide on architectures or designs that had nothing to do with one another, and they were so combative about it. But at the same time, we were friends. We were super close friends. And we knew that what we were arguing about was about the business, and it was about getting the job done. So you would hear us, somebody might come over to Iron Hill, and they might see us sitting down and yelling, literally yelling at each other across the table. How dare you choose MySQL? It's such a shit old piece of technology. And we're, meanwhile, in the same breath, we're saying, I'll have a Diet Coke, and do you want the sweet potato fries? Because we got to get some sweet potato fries. So that understanding, that difference for us was based on the fact that we shared the same core values, and we knew that the vision of the future of our product, of what we were going to build, involved more than just us as individuals fighting over some little tiny thing. But the interesting thing to understand is that you're creating a culture. The culture of Sev-One, when there were 3 people in a garage, is completely different. Ben, you could probably attest to this, to the culture of the company today at almost 400 employees. And the change in culture is not a bad thing. In fact, it's almost a necessity. I don't think you could have 400 people yelling and screaming at each other about decisions that are being made, even if they're going to go out to lunch and have a good time afterwards. It's just not going to work out. So it's okay that the culture is going to shift. But the reality is, that means that there's even more people who have to live and breathe those values, who have to live and breathe that vision. They have to all share that. Otherwise, you're going to start getting divergence. You're going to have sales folks who have different core values and a different vision of the company than the developers. And then you're going to have people butting heads. When you're at 400 employees, that means you might have 75 salespeople who all have the thought, well, screw the fast development, screw the innovation. We want to sell this stuff today. We need reliability in our release process. Everything has to be out every 9 months so that I can go to a customer and sell it. Meanwhile, R&D has all of these sweet features, all of these cool things that are going to change the way the product works, and they're really going to want to push it out. And maybe it's going to push back the release another month or 2, but they really want to get those features in there. That's 2 different entirely mentalities. And if you don't share the same vision of the company, you have no grounds upon which to have that conversation. Another important thing to think about is that not every person will fit every culture. Best example is me and Doug. Ves, since the beginning, Ves, our founder, has been a brilliant engineer who could fire from the hip at any time, and he has adapted really well to the way the company has grown. He's come to fit his CTO role. But myself and Douglas, we don't fit in the same kind of culture that the engineering team has grown into. And so we've moved into different roles. I'm now the product line manager of a new product that we just acquired. We actually acquired a company in March. I love the business side of things. I absolutely love talking to people. I love selling the product. I love getting involved in how the product is going to be delivered to a customer. That's so interesting to me. It's such a rich experience to see the engineers who use our product, it's a very engineer-focused tool, light up when they see that new cool feature in action. I want to see that every day. Doug, on the other hand, he has sort of pulled back from the development side of things, and he loves when a quality piece of the product gets put together. When the whole life cycle of the code goes through, and he finally gets to see how the quality is maintained, how we're able to keep this thing running at full speed, at full tilt, at all times of the day. That's really important to him. Then there are other employees who we've hired over the years who aren't with us anymore. And that's okay. It's okay because there's a culture that's right for them, and it's not this one. How many of you heard about the PayPal email that went out from the founder of PayPal when he was talking about the lackadaisical approach that the West Coast office took to adopting their mobile app? It was kind of a quiet thing, but he sent out an email to his entire San Jose office, and he said, guys, the adoption of this mobile app is crap for our internal employees. Everywhere else, every other office, the adoption rate's like 80% coverage, meaning 80% of the employees are actually using our PayPal mobile app, and it's really sweet. But you in the San Jose office, 10% are using it. Why is that? And he went on to say, if this company is not for you, if this culture is not for you, and you don't think and live and breathe the PayPal mentality, well, then you should find another job. And he didn't say it in a negative way. He meant because you need to find something that fulfills you. And he said that. You need to find something that engages you and makes you want to come to work every day and makes you want to give 110%. Because if you're not, well, then you're not giving me 110% and you're not giving yourself 110%. And we're both not happy. Now that got a huge outrage from the public. People thought that was the worst thing you could send to somebody. How dare you tell people that they should find another job? How dare you tell people that they should quit? But the reality is, if you think about it, well, they're not fit for the culture. It doesn't make sense for the company that they're in right now. And maybe they were in the beginning. Maybe they were around PayPal since the beginning. And they've kind of gotten, a couple thousand employees. I'm just a cog. It's not what I want to do. That's okay. That's totally fine. So the next part I want to talk about is the founding team and the people who start that culture. And people are really important. In fact, you can ask any VC. I've got one with me. The founding team is more important than that awesome idea that you have. You might think you're going to change the world with the way that awesome idea is going to develop and it's going to become product. But if you don't have the right team of people to do it, you don't have any product. And remember, you just have an idea right now. So that founding team, that team of entrepreneurs that you're putting together, it's super important that they are super valuable. Because a VC, a really good VC, is going to look at that team and say, well, that's great that you have this idea, but where's XYZ? Where's your technical side of your team? Where's your operational side of your team? How are you going to execute? How are you going to actually build this product? They care more about that team than they do about the idea. Imagine down the road if the idea you have doesn't pan out. You've started building the technology, the market shifts. Well, now you have a decision to make. Are you going to pivot? Am I going to take this technology and build something new? Are you going to collapse in, fold in, throw in all your cards? The team you have will help determine that, and a good founding team is the best chance you have at surviving that. So it's really important to recognize that the team you have is more important than the idea. So when you're thinking about your buddies that you're hanging out with and you all shooting, and I'm going to use more profanity, shooting the shit, whatever, and you find out that there's this really cool idea, this really cool thing you want to execute, you should really think about the fact that if you're just buddies, and again, you don't have the same values, you don't have the same vision for the future, you don't have the same set of ideals for how you're going to operate and how you're going to bring this product to fruition, really think about that, because that's really going to impact the great idea. So I put together a list of both skills and qualities that make up a really well-rounded founding team. Design and implementation, the actual technical side of things, like the guys who are actually going to build it and the guys who are going to implement it. If you don't have this as part of your team, you're going to be asked to find it. Because the first thing they're going to say when you have your idea is, well, that's fine, you've got a guy who can execute, you've got an operator, you've got some amazing storytelling that you're doing, I love your pitch, I love the way you present it to us, how the hell are you going to build this? You don't have a guy on your team, you don't have a technical founder, you don't have a product guy that's with you. So it doesn't have to be one individual for each one of these roles, but these skills absolutely have to be in all of your founding team, because that's what's going to be lacking. And qualities. I could list 1 billion qualities that you want to have, right? But clearly, It's the guys who have the good storytelling, they're the ones that are going to be passionate, right? And you're an entrepreneur, you're going to start a company. So you might think that you have a lot of ambition, but I would say that that vision better be scary to you. That vision of the future better shock and awe both yourself. It better be something so real to you and seems false to other people, right? That's ambition. Ambition is not, yeah, I think we're going to be able to sell this off to a company in about 2 or 3 years. If we get enough market share, it should be good. That's not ambition. That's lazy. Domain knowledge. So obviously understanding the market you're getting into, super important. I think that goes without saying. But deep domain knowledge is even more important. Really, truly understanding the customer experience, the market itself, the companies that are involved, the competition. Never underestimate your competition. That is like the biggest red flag ever that somebody could look at you. If you think that your market is so huge because you do something that differentiates yourself so greatly, and you underestimate how much of the market that the competition has, or even what the public vision, the public statements that the competition has put forward, if you underestimate that, you're going to fail. I mean, look at all of the people who have gone up against Splunk. If you're not familiar with Splunk, they're a log company, and they have a massive, massive market cap. And they have a massive marketing team. And they put out there, they think that they are the Google of unstructured data. So that pretty much sets their vision for the future right there, right? And that's made it really hard for the niche players to come in and chip away and do something really cool, because they feel like, well, you're up against Splunk. That's a really hard one to fight. What's your vision? How are you being ambitious? How do you have, what's your knowledge of this Splunk? What are they doing? What are you doing different? How are you attacking that? And that's where the vision comes in. So finally, getting even more focused on you guys, on the individuals. Self-leadership. And when I say that, I don't mean leading a team of people. I don't mean driving your founding team. I mean leading yourself. I mean thinking about yourself and growing yourself. That's the way to constant innovation. Because innovation can be had when you change the game with your first initial product. Maybe your MVP, maybe your great idea, and the product you build is revolutionary, and it reduces the amount of time that somebody has to do X by half, right? But that's your product today. If you want to constantly innovate, if you want to be on the forefront of bringing new product and bringing great features and functionality, you have to think of yourself as an individual, and you have to do a lot of things to make sure that you're constantly growing. And part of that is finding your mentor. So I can say for myself, I don't really think I've found the right mentor. I've changed my mentor. I'm at a stage where I'm looking for that next new one. I just got a really cool book that Ange gave me called 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel, and it's a really cool book, and he's a really smart entrepreneur, and I really love the way he thinks. So maybe he's the next step for me. But at any point in your life, think of that person that you look up to. It doesn't have to be in the same space as you. It doesn't even have to be an entrepreneur, but somebody that reflects the values and has the passion and has all of those things that you think about, that you really love, and really dig into why what they're doing works, right? Never stop learning. Never, ever, ever think that the qualities you have today to build your product today are going to get you through the future in 5 years. Whether you're in technology or not, technology changes all the time, always. Even if you're in finance, even if you're in business, you're in marketing, you think you're in ad sales, whatever the case may be, it's going to change 5 years from now. And in fact, the tools you're going to use are going to change. And the people are going to change. The market's going to change. Everything is constantly changing. It's in a constant influx. And because of that, you can't stop learning. You can't think that you can fire from the hip with the knowledge you have in your head from now until forever, because you'll be left in the dust. And always ask questions. This is something that I think is probably the hardest thing that people learn. And that's that you're not stupid for asking a question. When I gave this talk, a variation of this talk to the interns at UD, or at Sev-One, I let them know that when you're first starting in a company, you have almost no idea what this company is about. You might not know some really important financial things. Maybe as an intern, I had no idea how many stock options there were in total, right? And I was given some paper slip and it had a number on it. And it was like, this is how many you get of this thing. And I had no idea how many were in total, which means I have no idea how much I'm worth or what my total ownership of the company is. These are all absolutely valuable questions, and they're really smart questions. So never be afraid to ask those questions. What's the worst case scenario? Somebody says, I'm sorry, I can't tell you that. Is that really a bad answer? Is that really a bad thing to hear? Nobody's ever going to yell at you for asking a question. I am now the product line manager. I'm a business manager for an entire product line. I have never done this before in my life. I have questions every day, right? I have to put business reports together for our board. I have to go to a board meeting and present, here's the financials, here's how we did for the product line. You better bet I'm Googling that, because I have no clue how that's going to work. First, I'm of course going to ask our new CEO, then I'm going to ask our CTO if he doesn't have an answer, and so on and so forth. So never stop asking questions. So, I'd love to tell you a little bit more about my experience at Sev-One. This is really all I had to cover for the people part of startups. Does anybody have any questions?
You mentioned that you were getting a new mentor. How are you going about finding one?
Reading. I knew I forgot something. I was going to put up a list of things that I love reading. But I love consuming not just stuff from my space, but any kind of books. This 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel is all about, are you familiar with Blue Ocean Strategy? There's an older sort of business book. That was all about how you can attack a market not by going against your competition directly, but by differentiating yourself so much that you're in a blue ocean unto yourself instead of the red ocean of competition. That was a really cool book, and that started me off kind of on the reading in a business setting. 0 to 1 talks about sort of that same thing. Don't make an incremental change. Don't make a half step, a big step. So reading, really. And then the other thing is meeting people. So our new CEO is Jack Sweeney. One of the things that he said to me when I first met him and I first started taking this role on that took me a little off, and then I've come to love it, was when I said I wanted to start like a beta program. He goes, so who are you stealing that idea from? And I was like, no, I'm not stealing that idea from anybody. I'm making my own beta program. And he goes, that's the dumbest shit I ever heard. Do you know how many companies have a beta program? Do you know how many companies are successful with a beta program? Why would you reinvent the wheel? Do you really think that you're going to make a beta program that's better than every company that's ever made a beta program? And even if you did, why? How is that going to innovate for us? Instead, why waste your time on that beta program thought when you can take the beta program that's been successful and has been used before and use your mind power on innovating within the product that you want to build? That's brilliant. At first I was like, that's horrible. I don't want to steal, I don't want to copy. But the reality is, it's not. You can improve on that. And it's making that a tool. It's making that process, that thing that's just an implement for you, a powerful uplifter, because now you have time. Now you have your own resources to go dedicate to something else that's more important. So, any other questions?
I was going to ask how the investment from Bain affected the company culture.
That's a really good question. So I think the biggest cultural shift for us in the company was when Bain invested money. So up until this point, we had an investor, we had Angel really early on, and we bootstrapped. For those of you who are not familiar, basically that meant we found a really rich guy who was trying to invest in companies. He gave us a little bit of money to give us some runway, and we were running low. We found Osage Ventures, who's in Philadelphia. Really smart guys, really great group of people. They helped us along the way. When Bain invested in 2012, they invested $150 million into the company, which basically did two things. One, it made us go from a little itty bitty company to a big boy. And two, it made it so that if there was any hope that somebody was going to buy us, it ain't going to happen anymore. Because as soon as somebody invests $150 million into your company, that means that they want that much more money back. So unless somebody's going to buy us with a big fat check, it's not going to happen. So that means we're going public, right? You don't say it, but that's what it really means. So the cultural shift became, now we want to think about how we are going to become that big, huge company who's got a vision for 10 years out. Because if we're a public company, then we're not thinking about an exit in 2 or 3 years. We're not thinking about who we're going to start dating and then eventually take us over. Instead, we're thinking, okay, what's the long-term future? What's Sev-One going to do 10 years from now? What's the vision for the future? They've already talked about that in the boardroom. That's why Bain is going to invest $150 million. But now you have to think about that inside of everybody's minds throughout the company. Whether you're an intern who just started, whether you're somebody who was in product management at the time, you really have to think about that way. And the other thing that happened was massive influx of people. So $150 million that came into the company. We went from almost 100 employees to 400 since 2012. That's a huge number. It's magnitude, or a doubling of employees easily. And that meant that we suddenly had a lot of new faces all around you all the time, right? And I can say with a little bit of sadness that Sev-One didn't keep up the culture that we had when we were smaller, and we didn't live and breathe it into every new employee that we had. And we hired really too fast at first. We've slowed down hiring now. We're going to stay around the 400 and see how far that gets us until we need to ramp up development and such. But the problem became we hired all these new salespeople. We actually expanded upon the office. We built whole new office space. And then we stuffed them in there and we said, go to town, culture of awesome, make it happen, go nuts, right? That did not pan out. They were more or less wading in water, and some of them underwater. And it was hard because you didn't have the guys, we forgot to tell you that the way that we've gotten this far was we have a lot of self-driven, individually motivated, figure it out on their own kind of people. And I didn't think about that when I was interviewing you. And you're somebody who really needs guidance. And there's nothing wrong with that. You're really somebody who works better on a team. Well, unfortunately, at this stage of the company, that's not going to work out for you, right? So we actually had to backpedal a little bit. And that really did affect the way the culture has grown. That's a good question.
So you said that the mission of the business changed with investments, and that's just how companies work. So the culture should usually be in line with the whole mission statement behind the company. So what is the driving mission behind it?
Sure. So about the time that Bain invested was when some of us who have that's been like a heartbreak of mine for a while. We didn't have all of those components put together. It was sort of just we all felt it, we all knew it, right? And I wanted it written down. I wanted it something that was like on the wall. Like I don't know if you ever walked in Verizon. You might hate Verizon. Sometimes I really hate Verizon. But on their wall, they have their mission statement in every single building. Their mission statement is pretty cool, and I can't say it verbatim, but I'll instead give you ours. Our mission is to connect and collect data from the world's largest and most connected companies, regardless of what that data is, regardless of the technology, and give them insight into how their infrastructure is performing, how their network is performing. It's a little bit of a paraphrase because I don't remember things. But basically our thought is we want to be able to collect any kind of data at any kind of scale, at any kind of size of a network, regardless of what the size of that network is. And that network doesn't have to be a data network. It can be a telephony network. It can be phones. So far we figured out it can be power networks. There are plenty of those. We've started to tap into that sort of environment. So our mission, our vision then became we are really a platform for data collection and analysis for anything, right? So that shapes then when the product designers go to think about how they're going to design product, when the marketers go to think about how they're going to put the words together, and so on and so forth. So that was how it shifted. Before that, when we were even smaller, a little anecdote that probably isn't shared very often, probably shouldn't be recorded. When our first big check was Comcast. Comcast was a huge customer. They were our first $1 million customer. And we were a really tiny company. There were maybe 15 or maybe 20 of us at that time. And at that point in time, in whispers, Vess, over drinks, because we of course celebrated a $1 million deal, he was like, it's funny. I feel like if they came at us and said, we're not going to pay $1 million for your software, but we're going to pay $8 million to buy your company, I'd have been taken aback. I wouldn't have been ready. I'd have probably sold. And that was probably the starting point where I thought to myself, well, that's interesting because that's really not what I was going for as far as where the company was headed. And that's actually where I started thinking, we should write this shit down because it's really, it makes a difference when you go to have that conversation. So, yeah, it's another good point.
How does compensation in general affect the culture?
That's a really good question, and that's a really hard question. So there's a lot of the question was, how does compensation in general affect the culture and affect the way people? So there are some models that people have in organizations, like Cisco, for instance, where they'll actually show ranges for the different levels that you can get into. So say you're an SE, and you can be an SE level 1, an SE level 2, right? Sales engineer is like a technical sales guy. They'll actually show the range for the salary. So it can be anywhere from 60 to 70K, and then from 70 to 80K. And there might be overlap or whatever the case may be. And that's shown to be probably the least friction causing when it comes to how an organization is created, the culture. Because everybody knows what the potential is, right? And it takes away the discomfort of, oh, well, he's been with the company for 10 years, so he is clearly making more money than I am, even though I'm doing all this work or something like that, right? But the other component of it that needs to be there is, what are the responsibilities at each one of those levels, right? People love, even if you're the most free-form person, you still love knowing at what you need to do, what sort of checkboxes that you need to have as a person or as an employee to meet that goal, to meet that achievement, right? And it gives you something to work towards. What does really bad is what I just mentioned. The idea that you work in an organization and over time you start to think, I don't know what their salary is, but I've heard whispers, or it does create a bit of friction between people. I don't know, I don't have any experience to give you an anecdote about how you can quell that with, say, an openness, in communicating salaries specifically, or an openness in communicating compensation, or an openness in communicating like what we value as individuals. It's hard to say. I know for a fact that the developers that we have at Sev-One, I don't know every single one of them. We have like 70 of them now. I knew at one point in time they all well understood that the sales guys were making gobs and gobs of money from selling Sev-One, because our revenues were through the roof at one point in time. But they were almost all okay with that because of the fact that they had no desire to go be in that environment, to go fight 6 to 9 months, tooth and nail, phone calls 3 a.m. to try and sell the product, right? There was a level set of respect. It was almost like, we know you make gobs and gobs of money, but we also know what you do to get that, right? And I'll take my free booze, free puppies, and free food, right? Sales guys don't get that. So. Yeah, that's a really good question. That's a really hard question. I'll share, if there's no other questions, are some resources that I love to use. So I said books. Tons of books. I read up all the time. Audible. I listen to audiobooks sometimes. I'll send a list of books that I've been reading more recently. There's a lot of websites and like news articles that are sort of related to VC and things like that. There's a guy named Dan Primack who's in Boston, and actually Ange introduced me to his articles. He's got a daily email. It talks about big investments. It's sometimes focused in the enterprise space, but it can be consumer. It's pretty cool. It's really good. It covers a lot of relevant topics on things like who's the big movers and shakers. So Apple just announced a whole bunch of different products, and it was an interesting analysis about how Google decided 2 days beforehand to release a whole bunch of products and software. So it's really cool stuff like that. Resources for me as an individual that I use, I mean, the same stuff everybody else uses. Google, Stack Overflow, anything I can find. I'm a hacker in my free time. I like to code little things in my free time still. I love that hacking and coding for me has become more of a hobby than it is my job. So I would say, other than that, my growth as an individual and my growth in my employment and my career has really just been me searching out people who I've found that are holding that role and then hammering them with questions, right? And they're totally cool with it 9 times out of 10. And if they're not cool with it, then they're not a cool person, and screw them. So these are the way you can reach out to me, or you can see. I only just started the blog, and it's mainly going to be on data visualization. So if you're interested in any of that crap, and then email and whatnot. So if any other questions, if not, I know I'm running out of time, so I don't want to take up too much.